Jaq made a dramatic entrance, the music that reverbed within his car vibrating the ground with comedic fashion. You would have thought he suffered going deaf, yet was still perfectly coherent and could still pick up on even the slightest sounds. Exiting his car, he was wary, peering down both sides of the bridge to spot the creature if it happened to appear. "I will lay on the gas as soon as that thing appears." He pointed at her before switching towards me. He chuckled slightly before kicking the rim of his car that lay slightly underneath the back doors. A whir like a fan was audible before the door robotically unlatched. "Be my guest." He performed the same action upon the driver's side door, which responded similarly. Maeve passed to the right and occupied the seat adjacent to mine, directly behind the passenger seat, which had already been occupied by Jack's cat. He was an orange tabby that carried a similar facial structure to a mountain fox, with a sharper jaw to nose along with pointed ears. His tail and furry paws swapped sides from that of a normal cat, with his tail being more intricate and less symmetrical. It bore left with a poof on the right, an odd and unique design to bestow upon a cat. You could sense that he wasn't entirely comfortable, with slightly descended ears and a tail that drooped beneath the leather seat. It seemed as if he was attempting to discover the optimal position to lie down and lay immobile, and his posture while strutting was much more elegant than that of a normal feline. I saw his eyes gaze on me, yipping when I heard the snap of the seatbelt click. With a graceful leap, he bounded over the center console and into my lap. As he sat upon my legs, he looked up at me with wanting eyes and a soft purr that was relaxing to hear. I threw up my hand, and before I could manage to land it upon his head, he cast it into it with eagerness, rubbing up against me to convey affection. Jack finally set foot into the driver's seat, smacking the on button to the car before glancing behind to me and his cat. "He seems to like you," he pointed out. "Doesn't usually jump at people when he first sees them." The cat mewed. "Yeah," I started. "He seems to really like me." Jack returned the car into drive, climbing the ladder of his playlist that originated from his phone. Every switch led to an abrupt break of the speaker's connection, returning the action with a sound like the scratch of a microphone, horrendous to my ears. He seemed to automatically drive the volume downwards as the first song introduced itself, even himself cringing in discomfort at the volume it was. He's a pretty good cat, not really mischievous, and he loves to listen to our songs, ironically. I like the little guy. I brushed my hand over the valley of fur on the cat's back, him procuring a more audible purr that rose and befell its chest. "Never seen him before?" I inquired. Jack floored the pedal and the car was flung down the bridge, arriving at the street ahead's intersection where he jolted the wheel hard to the left, sending it into a U-turn before he pinned down the pedal once more. "Yeah, my mom found this cat sitting on our porch balcony last week. It was trying to swat our bird. So, it didn't have a tag, it didn't have a collar, so we just took it in." "Huh." And, I glanced away before eyeing him in the mirror with a half-joking, half-concerned expression. "How did your bird react to that?" I asked. Pecked the shit out of him. That's really all I can say. But he's a perfect second companion to my family." His expression grimmed into a distressing 1,000-yard stare. "Alright, I want to ask something before we get out of here." His speech was in unison with the now recoloring sky, distorting before reverting from a maroon red back into a mix of navy and baby blue. He seemed completely oblivious to it, though, not pausing his sentences to study the phenomenon. "Does that thing I heard know where you are? And if it caused such a big situation, why is nobody in the area reacting to it?" He gestured with his hand. I immediately responded, I don't think it hurt us, and I don't know to that second one, although it's a pretty good question," I agreed. And I actually have one for you. I seemingly caught him off guard, his eyebrow raising in anticipation. Shoot! When you got here, did you bother looking up? His face scrunched. Why would I? There's nothing interesting about anything above me. I swirled my head towards Maeve. It wasn't red. Two distinct expressions flickered on his face, one of extremely vivid fear, the other of pondering. No, I'm not gonna be weird about it though. If you two both saw it, I can't deny it, even though I didn't see it. Maeve and I exchanged looks of anxiety, seemingly as we were both considering the same multiple scenarios in our head. And I'm gonna assume that it was whatever that damn thing was. He was dangerously sharp-witted, seemingly able to piece even the most obscure pieces of any situation together with limited strings of information. Wow. I scratched the underside of the tabby's chin. That's a very quick and correct conclusion, apparently. Jaq raised an eyebrow in confusion. I mean, the school faculty should have been there, right? He questioned. What about them? That's the thing. The only person that was there besides us two was my AP US teacher, and we didn't hear him or know if he was still in the school. Why was he there? He was the one that gave me study hall. Ah. Jaq careened to the right, entering to the street, and to Maeve and I, realizing it was the first one that didn't have its electricity shot, as every lamp and light post stood illuminated across the vacant avenue. She seemed to agree with an observation I was about to make, although he hadn't even uttered a whisper. Jaq, was every light in the street lamps on for you prior to this one? I'm guessing for you it wasn't? He hit a sharp return after passing the neighborhood. If that's the case, since I at least heard the thing, it might be messing with your vision, or something similar. We were astonished about how he seemed to be plucking our assumptions out of our heads without even hearing us say it. Even though we were the ones that had experienced the frightening occurrence, it was as if he stood one step ahead of us in that regard. Goddamn, you can understand a situation fast. He chuckled. Yeah, listen though, I believe you now, and I'm trying to piece everything together so that we can get that thing off the face of the earth, cause if it's coming for you two, I'm not staying here. Although, if I hadn't heard the scream it's made, I'd probably still have not believed you. I wouldn't think you would. Me finally muttered. I mean, even if we figure out what that thing was doing, it's not as if we can stop it. Probably, I reluctantly agreed. What about what'll happen when they find it? Do you think they actually will? Do you two actually think they will? I mean, you two only managed to see it, and it's apparently due to the little effect it made that no one else managed to see. Jaq cut his sentence off prematurely as a car swerved out of an adjacent garage, the sudden burst of movement it received imprinting the tires rubber into the ground. He had to both swerve and reverse his feet on the pedals to prevent the collision that otherwise would have happened. Our car twisted and groaned in horrendous effort as the side window of our car only barely managed to scrape the milky paint of the vehicle now on our side. As we halted, everyone was slingshotted outwards from their seats, the impact of the seatbelt locking into place producing a discolored blemish across everyone else's chests, which I assumed for them immediately seared with pain. I wasn't spared the luckiness to still be confined to the seat. My own seatbelt unlatched and snapped broken, chucking me forwards and sending me ramming through the fragile glass of the car's hood. Unlike the windows in the now disastrous school, it did not shatter. Rather, instead it split into 3 more sizable pieces that pierced the paper-thin metal that covered the engine, before holding in place, just barely offset from the still running contraption. I landed against my feet, which slid with friction against the pavement before sending me face first into it when I'd lost all speed. Shielding myself, my arms reactively went up and broke my fall, although the wind got knocked out of me when I landed, and my arms are raked into awful marks that bled through the sleeves of my hoodie. Now is when the adrenaline kicked in. It bestowed an odd feeling, though. I discerned the energy I required to bring myself upwards, but that was it. The scraping of my arms dissipated within seconds when it made its ingress, along with the pain from anything else that had preceded this event. I only identified a single location upon my body that retained any sort of intolerable ache, which was my head. A few inches above my ears was a moderately sharp stinging sensation. Accompanied with it, a liquid was trickling down, fairly slowly and heavily. I had to pause as I felt my heartbeat resonating from these two places, leading me to believe I'd somehow cut my scalp open, or another possibility that could have occurred was the glass had gored into my skull. I raised myself from the ground, and feeling around, my hands reached an object. It was rigid, and from the sheer touch alone, it would have been impossible to be hollow. No give was apparent anywhere that I could manage to notice. Through the minuscule ridges of my fingers, there was a fuzz as if hair was occupying it. Multiple protrusions extended outwards the more I felt around, the mere root of whatever the thing was steadily going diagonally away from me. As I half inspected the now drying blood on my hands, I saw Jaq still resting in the driver's seat, gawking agape at me in fright. Maeve was still slumped in agony, still in the back seat, but even in her condition, her eyes were now wide open, eyebrows creased in horror at what she was witnessing. If anyone had inhabited the car that shot towards ours, they'd already fled the scene and abandoned it, now only having us remain. "What?" I called. "Did something happen to my head?" Jaq muttered something unintelligible that Maeve nodded her head in agreement with, and while she stretched and coughed for air, Jaq extended for the glove compartment, rummaging through it before raising up a pistol. Without warning, the muzzle flashed hues of white, and the bullet that laid in its chamber whizzed towards me at twice the speed of sound, giving me a very minimal window to swerve out of its trajectory. I didn't fear it, only swiftly avoiding the path by shifting right. "What the hell?" I shouted. "You realize that thing can kill me, right? Why are you trying to shoot at me?" "That's the whole point," he answered, his voice cracking with hoarse anticipation of what I would make occur. Myself, I had still been directed down a path of hesitancy, baffled by the drastic action Jaq had performed as a precaution against me. He still possessed the manner of distress that he'd been retaining, right hand now wrenching the gear shift as if a lever, the car spurting back to life before reversing out of its impact position. Its flickering flaxen lights radiated towards me as he barreled the wheels rearward, the two of them bolting out of the scene to escape me. I was still incapable of managing to decipher the sudden burst that he'd performed, although via context it was pictured to me to be relating to the implements it plunged into my frame. Gingerly, I sauntered over to arrive at the overhanging side mirror attached to the devastated sports car, which miraculously still stood, albeit remaining within no condition to be piloted. I eyed the vivid reflection of my form, seeing what at least Jaq had reacted to with such urgency towards. The reflection I was witnessing failed to gift a passive enough difference in appearance that would justify an inappropriate retort from anybody. Even Jaq's reaction was less than what should have been expelled my way. What stood atop my head weren't displaces masses of glass. They were antlers, frail and bony. A ghastly resonance seemed to ooze off of them the more I stood immobile, reeking of decaying flesh and rotting cartilage as if I'd been implemented far within a primordial graveyard. They were construed and aberrant, sharpened to the honed detail of medieval weaponry, and were colossal in terms of dimension. Each protrusion extended with asymmetrical proportion, some coiled as if they were rope, others linear like skyscrapers. And whilst the sight bore the requirements demanded to divert attention from onlookers, it was far from the most appalling feature. The winner in that regard leaned towards what my head had decided to morph into. It neglected to provide ears, although it still retained my hearing. Its shape was that of a ram's skull, prolonged and acute. At the angle of where my mouth were to open, my nose wasn't present, rather an agape cavity that pathed inwards. I sniffed, and even though my features were altered, air was distinctly present, as if no change had occurred. Of course, most likely the intimidating trait was my bare eye sockets, two hollowed out carvings that occupied both brims of the skull. As I stirred my eyes, my peripheral was incapable of detecting any movement that ensued within them, only two pitch-black voids that wouldn't alert anybody if I happened to glance in their direction. I possessed a protruding jaw, aligned with rows of serrated teeth that carried the same lethal shape as a hyena. My brain still left a phantom feeling of my tongue, even though my mouth was now only a fossil. I noticed my hands leisurely rising to check the features, but I halted them once gazing upon the arms that were bearing them. They were an inky black amalgamation, the bone being visible through a slender tarp of sable skin. The joint was predominantly visible, shifting upwards whenever I forced it to bend. As for my fingers, they'd been completely modified. They were enlarged unnaturally, not to a horrendous point, but compared to the rest of my body, they seemed to develop diversely. Each was a contraption with enough brawn to sliver through pure titanium alone, yet were only as dense as thick-set sticks. In my body, an ashy and sooty outline of the almost non-existent muscles that were curtained behind them. What had made me this way?